The cruiser's tires crunched slowly along the gravel driveway, the sound unnaturally loud in the wide-open silence. Deputy Mark Holloway eased his foot off the gas, his instincts prickling even before he could explain why. The farm sat alone at the edge of Cedar Hollow County, fields stretching endlessly behind it, corn stalks bent and broken by winter winds. The sky hung low and gray, the kind that pressed down on a man's chest without touching him. Beside Mark in the passenger seat, K9 Rex lifted his head. Rex was a seasoned German shepherd, 6 years old, trained for narcotics, tracking, and apprehension. He'd been through traffic stops, foot chases, domestic calls, and search warrants without flinching. He didn't spook easily. When he did, Mark paid attention. "What is it, boy?" Mark murmured, keeping his voice low. Rex's ears stood straight up. His body went rigid, muscles tightening like drawn wire. His nose worked the air through the open window, slow at first, then faster. A faint rumble vibrated in his chest, not quite a growl yet, but close. Mark's hand tightened on the steering wheel. They were responding to a routine call. Noise complaints, a report of livestock screaming late at night, maybe coyotes, maybe an old generator acting up, nothing that should set Rex off like this. Mark brought the cruiser to a stop. Ahead the farmhouse sat weathered but maintained. White siding, sagging porch, a single light on in the kitchen window. To the right farther back stood the barn, large, red, and looming, its paint peeling in long strips that fluttered in the breeze like loose skin. And standing between the house and the barn was a woman. She appeared to be in her late 40s, wrapped tightly in a faded denim jacket despite the mild cold. Her dark hair was pulled back hastily, as if she'd rushed outside. She watched the cruiser with a forced calm that didn't reach her eyes. Mark opened his door. The wind carried the sharp scent of hay, dirt, and something sour he couldn't immediately place. Rex stepped out beside him and froze. The low rumble in his chest deepened into a growl. "Rex," Mark warned quietly. The dog didn't look at him. His eyes were locked on the barn. The woman noticed. Her gaze flicked from Mark to Rex, then to the barn behind her. The color drained from her face so quickly it was unmistakable. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. "Ma'am," Mark called, keeping his tone neutral. "Sheriff's Department. We had a call about noise on the property." She nodded too fast. It's nothing, just animals. They get restless at night." Rex took a step forward. The leash snapped taut in Mark's hand. "Easy," Mark whispered, planting his feet. Rex strained harder, nails scraping against the gravel. His growl rose in pitch, sharp and urgent now. This wasn't aggression, this was alarm. Mark felt it settle deep in his gut. "What kind of animals?" he asked, eyes never leaving the woman. She swallowed. "Chickens, a goat, sometimes they knock things over." Another step backward, from her this time. Rex barked once, loud enough to echo off the barn walls. The woman flinched as if struck. Mark saw it then, the tremor in her hands, the way her shoulders hunched defensively, not toward him, but toward the barn. Like a child standing in front of a door they were terrified someone might open. "Ma'am, what's your name?" Mark asked. "Evelyn," she said, "Evelyn Carter." Rex lunged. Mark barely held the leash in time. The force nearly yanked him off balance, boots sliding across the gravel. "Rex," he snapped. The dog ignored the command completely. Mark's heart rate spiked. Rex had never disobeyed a direct correction like that, not once. Evelyn's breath came fast and shallow. "You don't need to go back there," she said quickly. "The barn's unstable, old beams, it's dangerous." Mark raised an eyebrow. "Dangerous how?" She hesitated, just a fraction of a second, but it was enough. Rex's nose lifted high, then snapped toward the barn doors. He let out a sound Mark had only heard a few times before, a frantic, high-pitched whine layered under the growl. "Fear." "Rex," Mark said more firmly now, "sit." The dog didn't sit. Instead, he pulled harder, eyes wild, body trembling with urgency. His gaze never left the barn. Mark's pulse thudded in his ears. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "has anyone else been on your property tonight?" Evelyn shook her head. "No, just me." A sharp bang echoed from inside the barn. Not loud, muffled, heavy, like something hitting wood. Evelyn gasped. Rex exploded into barking, throwing his full weight forward. Mark dug his heels in, adrenaline surging through him. "What was that?" Mark demanded. It's nothing," Evelyn cried. "The wind, something fell, please, you don't need to." Another sound cut her off. This one wasn't wood. It was a sound Mark recognized instantly, even through layers of distance and denial. A human voice. Faint, broken, desperate. Rex howled. Mark's training took over, his mind narrowing to sharp, efficient focus. His hand went to his radio. "Dispatch," he said, voice tight. "I need backup at my location, possible 10:33. Evelyn dropped to her knees. "I didn't mean for this," she sobbed, clutching at her hair. "I tried to stop it, I swear." Mark drew his weapon, never taking his eyes off the barn. Rex strained at the leash, body quivering with purpose, as if every second mattered more than the last. Mark stepped forward. The barn doors loomed taller now, shadows pooling beneath the gaps in the wood. Behind him, Evelyn cried openly. Ahead of him, Rex growled, a warning, a promise, and a plea all at once. And as Mark reached the first step toward the barn, he knew with chilling certainty that whatever waited inside wasn't just the reason Rex had lunged. It was something that was never supposed to be found. The sun had disappeared behind the horizon hours ago, leaving only a dull, gray haze that pressed against the farm. Mark felt it in his chest, a weight he couldn't explain. The quiet wasn't the kind of quiet that signals peace. It was heavy, predatory. Even the wind seemed hesitant, whispering through the bare corn stalks like it feared what lay ahead. Evelyn huddled a few feet behind him, shivering despite the mild winter air. Her knuckles were white as she gripped her jacket. "Please, you don't have to go in there," she pleaded. Her voice trembled, low and urgent. "Nothing good happens in that barn." Mark didn't respond. He had a job to do. He'd been through enough farms, abandoned buildings, and livestock calls to know when a situation was more than it seemed. The growl of Rex at his side made that decision for him. The barn's paint was nearly gone, wood warped and splintered, doors hanging unevenly on rusty hinges. Shadows pooled in the gaps, shifting in ways that played tricks on the eye. It had been years since anyone dared to enter. Neighbors whispered about it like it was a cursed place. Stories of screams in the night, animals disappearing, strange visitors, all dismissed by authorities as rural superstition. Yet Mark could feel something in the air that was more than rumor. Rex's growl escalated, then changed pitch, short, sharp barks now slicing the air, each one more urgent than the last. Mark gritted his teeth, holding the leash tightly. His other hand hovered over his radio. This wasn't routine, not by a long shot. Evelyn's eyes never left the barn. She staggered backward, knees hitting the gravel. "It's not safe," she whispered, almost to herself. "It's not safe for anyone." Mark's gaze followed Rex's laser-focused attention. There was movement inside the barn, subtle but enough to disturb the shadows. Something or someone was hiding just out of clear view. The air reeked faintly of manure and decay, but underneath that there was another smell, metallic, coppery, the kind that clung to your nose and made your stomach twist. "Evelyn, I need you to step back." "Now," Mark said firmly, but she didn't move. Rex barked again, frantic now, lunging toward the barn door. The leash pulled Mark off balance, boots sliding on the gravel. His heart hammered in his chest. He knew that sound. Rex never reacted like this unless danger, real danger, was present. "Mark, please," Evelyn cried, her voice breaking. "You don't understand, you can't go in there." "What is in there?" he demanded. Her hands trembled, covering her mouth as tears welled. I didn't mean for it to happen. I did." Another sound erupted from the barn, thump, 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 heavy, deliberate. Something was moving inside, something alive. Rex barked violently, dragging Mark closer, almost pulling him to his knees. Mark's gut twisted. His mind raced through possibilities, an animal trapped, someone hurt, or something worse. He reached for the barn door cautiously, gun in hand. Just as he touched the weathered wood, a faint whimper echoed from inside. It was human, broken, desperate, and impossibly faint. Evelyn gasped, collapsing against the side of the porch. Oh God, she whispered. "I tried to keep it hidden, but it's my fault." Mark's eyes darted from her to the barn, then back to Rex, whose growls were now tinged with panic. The dog's instincts told him what words could not. Someone was in trouble, someone alive, maybe barely. Mark steadied his breathing. Every second mattered. He pressed against the barn door. The hinges groaned, complaining, but the wood held. There was a sudden scuttling sound, metal scraping, chains maybe. Evelyn shrieked, covering her face. "Please don't go in, please." Mark's voice softened but remained firm. "Evelyn, I can't let whoever is in there suffer. I have to see." The dog lunged forward again, leash straining. Mark barely restrained him. The barn's shadows seemed to pulse, hiding something enormous, or maybe several somethings. The metallic smell grew stronger. Then from the corner of the barn came a new sound, a faint cry, almost like someone calling for help. This time it was unmistakable. Mark froze, heart pounding, sweat prickling the back of his neck. He didn't need to guess. He knew instinctively that whatever had caused Rex to react like this was serious, and whatever it wasn't going to wait quietly for the police to figure it out. Evelyn's face was ghostly white. "If you go in there, you won't be ready," she whispered. Her hands shook as she held them out in front of her, pleading, warning him. Mark's mind raced. He had to act, but every instinct screamed danger. His eyes met Rex's, steady, unwavering, alive with the intensity of purpose. The dog's stare was almost human, commanding him to do the one thing he feared most. Mark tightened his grip on the leash. He reached for the barn door. The hinges groaned. The door shifted slightly. And then a sudden heavy crash came from inside, as if something had fallen or someone had been struck. Evelyn screamed. Mark's breath caught in his throat. The barn was no longer just a building, it was a trap. And something inside had noticed them. Rex growled, teeth bared, ears forward, body tense like a spring about to snap. Mark whispered to himself, almost as a warning, "Whatever's in there, it's alive." From the shadows came a faint but unmistakable sound, a second, deeper cry. Human, terrified. And just like that, the night's quiet exploded into chaos. Mark took a deep breath, one hand on the door, the other steadying Rex. His pulse rattled in his ears. He knew he had only one choice. He pushed the door, and the darkness inside seemed to exhale. A figure stirred. Mark froze. Evelyn's sobs pierced the cold night air. Rex lunged again. And Mark realized they were not prepared for what awaited them inside the barn. Mark's heart hammered in his chest as the barn door groaned against the rusty hinges. The faint light from the cruiser's headlights spilled across the warped boards, illuminating decades of neglect. Splintered wood, rusted tools, and shadows that seemed to slither across the walls. Rex strained violently at the leash, growling, whining, and barking in a rhythm that made the hairs on Mark's neck stand on end. Evelyn stepped back. "Now," Mark commanded, his voice tight but controlled. She froze, knuckles digging into the dirt, eyes wide and shimmering with fear. She shook her head, whispering, "You don't understand, Yuka." Mark ignored her. Every fiber of his being screamed that someone was in there, alive, and every second that passed could cost a life. He gripped Rex's leash tighter and took a slow step forward. The dog's intensity was contagious, feeding Mark's adrenaline and sharpening his senses. Rex darted forward, yanking Mark to the edge of the porch. The leash pulled taut. A sharp metallic clang rang out from inside the barn, the unmistakable sound of a chain. Mark froze mid-step. His eyes narrowed. That sound didn't belong to animals. A faint whimper, barely audible over the wind, reached them. Human, terrified, alive. Mark drew his weapon slowly, methodically. His training took over. Every muscle in his body coiled like a spring, ready to react. His gaze swept the barn's exterior, calculating angles, knotting escape routes. And then his eyes locked on the door's padlock, a thick, rusted piece of metal, old but solid. Someone had deliberately secured this barn. Someone had been keeping their secret inside. He bent down and touched the padlock. Cold. He tugged gently, testing it. It rattled but held firm. Rex barked, high-pitched and insistent, jerking again toward the door. Mark took a deep breath. He had to act fast. He reached into his coat and pulled out a crowbar, glancing at Evelyn. "You need to stay back," he warned. Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded, stepping away reluctantly. Mark wedged the crowbar under the lock. It scraped against metal, sparks dancing in the dim light from friction. He braced himself, tugging with all his strength. The padlock creaked ominously and gave way with a loud snap, echoing through the night. Rex barked triumphantly, tail stiff, ears forward. The door shifted under Mark's push, opening slowly, revealing the darkness inside. Immediately the smell hit, stale air, dust, and something far worse. The coppery tang of blood, faint but unmistakable. Mark's stomach clenched. He fought the urge to gag. Rex growled low in his throat, standing rigid, sniffing the air with unrelenting focus. From deep within the shadows a sound emerged, a weak, trembling human moan. Mark's pulse skyrocketed. He crouched slightly, gun raised, every step cautious, silent. The air was thick with fear, yet Mark's training pushed him forward. He had no choice. The first thing he saw was a movement, something bound, slumped against a wooden post. A man, pale and bruised, barely conscious, his clothes torn and stained. Mark's eyes widened. He had expected animals, maybe a drunken trespasser. Not this. Not someone beat and chained and left to suffer in darkness. Rex barked and strained forward, nudging Mark toward the man, growling to let him know the danger and the urgency. Mark knelt beside the man, carefully examining the ropes binding his wrists and ankles. "It's okay, I've got you," he said softly, urgency in his tone. The man's eyes fluttered open, pupils wide with confusion and fear. "Help," he croaked. Behind Mark, Evelyn whispered, her voice shaking. I didn't want this to happen." Her words trembled in the night air. She stumbled, sinking to her knees, burying her face in her hands. "I tried to stop it," she sobbed. Mark's focus didn't waver. He tugged at the ropes, finally freeing the man's wrists. The chains clattered to the floor. The man slumped forward, gasping for air, shaking violently. Blood streaked his face and bruises marked his body like a dark roadmap of abuse. Mark helped him upright, scanning the barn with his flashlight. The interior was a nightmare. Tools scattered like weapons, blood splatters on the walls, makeshift cages in corners, and symbols carved into the wood, strange marks that looked ritualistic. A camera sat in the far corner, lens starring like a dark eye, recording everything in the dim light. "Who did this?" Mark demanded, glancing at Evelyn. Her body shook, silent sobs racking her. She choked out a sound, barely a whisper. My husband, he said it would scare them, just scare them, not." Her voice cracked, tears streaming freely. She covered her mouth with shaking hands. Rex stayed at Mark's side, growling low, ears forward, scanning every shadow. The dog's instincts screamed that the danger wasn't over. Mark's mind raced. This was no ordinary farm crime. This was organized, deliberate, evil, and it was only the beginning. From deeper in the shadows, a faint noise like something shifting made Mark freeze. Rex stiffened, hackles raised, snarling low. "Don't move," Mark whispered to the man. Evelyn gasped, "It's still here." Mark's stomach dropped. Something or someone else was in the barn, watching, waiting. And in that instant, he realized the horror that had begun with one chained man was far from finished. Rex barked again, a sharp, urgent warning. Mark's eyes narrowed. He whispered to himself, "Whatever in here, it's not done." The shadows stirred, and the barn seemed to grow darker, closing in around them, holding secrets that were ready to strike. The air inside the barn was thick, almost tangible, carrying the scent of fear, blood, and decay. Dust motes floated in the narrow beams of Mark's flashlight, illuminated like tiny fireflies in a cursed world. Every step he took on the splintered wood echoed, bouncing off the walls, mingling with Rex's low growl and the faint moans of the man slumped against the post. Rex surged forward suddenly, breaking free of Mark's partial control. The dog lunged, claws scraping the floor, teeth bared, ears pinned forward in raw, primal focus. He didn't bite, yet, but his presence was an undeniable assertion. Something in the barn was wrong and it was dangerous. Mark followed quickly, gun raised, flashlight slicing through the darkness. The injured man slumped toward him, weak and trembling. Mark steadied him, whispering, "I've got you. You're safe now." The man's eyes were wide, bloodshot, darting around the barn in fear. They said I wouldn't be missed," he croaked, voice hoarse and ragged. "I was just investigating." Mark's eyes narrowed. Investigating what? The man coughed violently, blood spitting from his mouth. "Disappearances, people gone in this county. They thought I was snooping too close." Rex barked sharply at a corner of the barn. Mark's light swung toward it. A faint outline of a small wooden cage came into view. Inside, the floor was darkened, sticky with dried blood. The smell was overwhelming. Mark swallowed hard, stomach twisting. Evelyn stumbled forward, sobbing, pressing her hands against her mouth. I didn't know it would get this far," she whispered, shaking violently. "I tried to stop him. I tried to." Her voice broke, lost to the darkness. Mark's attention snapped back to the barn. There was more than one shadow lurking, more than one secret waiting to be uncovered. Rex's gaze shifted, muscles coiled like springs. His hackles remained raised, tail stiff. He nosed at the floor near another post. Mark crouched beside him, the flashlight revealing something that made his stomach churn. A shallow depression, recently disturbed earth, smeared with dark streaks that weren't just mud. "What is it, boy?" Mark muttered under his breath. Rex pawed at the ground insistently, whining now, eyes never leaving the far corner. Mark turned the flashlight slowly. There, pressed against the far wall, was a figure curled tightly. A young man, no more than 25, bound and gagged, trembling violently. His eyes met Mark's in desperation. "Holy," Mark whispered, dropping to his knees. He didn't have to ask who had done this. Every instinct screamed that the same person, or people, responsible for the first victim were behind this. Evelyn gasped, her knees buckling as she pressed herself against a support beam. "I didn't mean for him, I didn't." Mark gestured for her to stay back. He moved quickly to the new victim, cutting the ropes with a multi-tool from his belt. The man sagged forward, coughing, shivering violently, eyes darting to Rex as if the dog were a guardian angel. He saved my life," the young man croaked, his voice barely audible. Mark glanced at Rex, who stood stiffly, scanning the shadows, teeth bared but controlled. The dog had sensed it. Rex had known this was more than a simple barn or farm crime. He had sniffed the fear, the blood, the intent. Mark helped the man upright, supporting him. His flashlight swept the room again. The camera in the far corner reflected a faint red glow. Someone had recorded all of this. Every scream, every struggle, every act of violence had been captured. Evelyn's sobs grew louder. She sank to the floor, covering her face. I never wanted anyone to get hurt. He made me help. I thought I could control it." Mark's stomach turned. Her words were half confession, half panic. But the man on the floor, bloodied, bruised, trembling, needed immediate attention. Mark gestured for Rex to stay alert. The dog barked, low and warning, packing the perimeter. Outside, distant sirens could be heard, but they would take minutes to arrive. Every second counted. Mark's mind raced. How many others were hidden? How many others could be alive or dead in this barn or elsewhere? The first victim, slumped against the post, looked up at Mark weakly. They're organized, it's not just him. It's a network, you don't understand. Mark's pulse spiked. A network. This wasn't an isolated crime. This was methodical, planned, cold-blooded. He turned to Evelyn, voice sharp. Who else knows? Her eyes filled with terror, tears streaming down her cheeks. I don't know, I swear, I don't. I didn't, Her voice broke entirely. Rex barked again, a high-pitched, urgent warning. His gaze locked on the far side of the barn. Something moved, something large, and it wasn't the victims. Mark froze, flashlight cutting through the darkness. Shadows twisted unnaturally in the corners. A low, guttural sound rumbled from the back of the barn. Not human, not fully. Mark's hand tightened on his gun. His mind raced. The barn wasn't empty. And whatever else was in there had just taken notice of them. Rex growled, low and threatening, teeth glinting in the flashlight beam. Mark swallowed hard, realizing that the danger they faced had only just begun. Evelyn's sobs were drowned by a new sound, a soft, deliberate shuffle of feet against the wooden floor, slow, measured, and coming closer. The shadows shifted again, coalescing into something horrifyingly deliberate. Mark knew instinctively they were not alone. And whatever or whoever was in the barn was still very much alive. The sirens were distant now, swallowed by the fields and the darkness, but Mark barely registered them. His focus was entirely on the barn and the people within it. The first victim, bruised and pale, slumped against the post, his body trembling. The second young man sat on the floor, weak gag removed, staring blankly at Mark, as if trying to comprehend that he was alive. Evelyn knelt on the splintered wood, sobbing, unable to meet anyone's eyes. She had gone from frantic pleading to silent confession. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, she whispered, her voice hoarse. I thought I could control him. I thought I could keep it safe. Mark's grip on his gun tightened. He needed answers. His K9 partner, Rex, paced the barn with calculated vigilance, ears perked, tail stiff. The dog's instincts were razor-sharp. Whatever danger had orchestrated this horror was still in play. Mark turned back to Evelyn. Start talking. Now, he said firmly, eyes piercing hers. Evelyn shook violently, tears streaming down her cheeks. My husband, he's not dead, she whispered, voice breaking. Mark's pulse jolted. He told me what to do, people disappearing. He said it was only for money, only for control. I thought it was harmless. He told me no one would get hurt. I didn't know. Mark's jaw tightened. The pieces began to snap into place. The organized nature of the captives, the carved symbols, the camera, the meticulous restraints. Evelyn's husband wasn't just dangerous. He was calculating. Every element of this barn, every gruesome corner, had been orchestrated for a purpose. The first victim coughed, blood flecking his lips. I'm a private investigator, he rasped. His eyes were wild, scanning every shadow. I was looking into a string of disappearances, this county people who vanish, and he found out I was close. He planned to make an example of me. Mark's mind raced. Private investigator, disappearances, missing persons. The reality was worse than anything he'd imagined. This wasn't an isolated crime. It wasn't a deranged murder in a remote barn. It was part of a network of terror operating right under the county's nose. Rex barked sharply at the far corner of the barn, teeth glinting, hackles raised. Mark's flashlight swept the darkness. Symbols scratched into the walls told stories of fear, control, and ritualistic intimidation. Each mark was deliberate. The camera in the corner, still blinking faintly red, had captured it all. Evelyn's voice trembled. He said we had to teach them. The ones who asked too many questions. I didn't know it would go this far, I swear. Her sobs were ragged, cutting through the barn like a knife. Mark's pulse throbbed in his temples. He realized this wasn't just domestic terror. It was methodical, premeditated, and worse, ongoing. Whoever was behind this, her husband, had planned to continue, and Evelyn, terrified and complicit, had been caught in his manipulation. Outside, the distant sound of sirens grew louder. Backup was almost here, but the barn still held more secrets. Mark's instincts, sharpened by years of patrol work and reinforced by Rex's unerring sense of danger, screamed that the immediate threat wasn't gone. He glanced at Rex. The dog's stance was tense, body coiled, eyes fixed on the shadows. Every instinct in Mark's body told him the danger was still in the barn, unseen but palpable. The private investigator, now partially upright and leaning heavily against Mark, muttered, "They're not alone. He's not the only one. It's bigger than you think." His eyes darted to the rafters. Mark followed his gaze, and a chill ran down his spine. Rex growled low, warning of movement above them. The barn's shadows seemed to ripple, dark shapes shifting against the old wood beams. Something was watching, waiting, calculating. Mark raised his flashlight, sweeping it across the ceiling and upper loft. The rafters were cluttered with old hay, wooden supports, and shapes. Human shapes, crouched and still, eyes gleaming faintly in the beam. Evelyn screamed, her voice breaking the silence. "No, you're going to hurt them. Don't I." Mark's voice cut through the chaos. "Stay down, everyone stay down." The tension in the barn was suffocating. Rex lunged, barking violently at the rafters. The shapes moved suddenly. One leapt down with astonishing speed, landing in a crouch, revealing a man older than the private investigator, tall, muscular, and cruel-looking. His eyes glinted with malice. Mark raised his gun. "Don't move." The man smirked. "You shouldn't have come here," he said calmly, almost amused. "She was supposed to control them, but you ruin everything." Mark's jaw tightened. He knew instinctively this was the mastermind, the orchestrator, Evelyn's husband or one of his associates. The barn wasn't just a hideout, it was a testing ground, a warning, and a trap all at once. Rex barked again, lunging forward, but Mark held him back. The man's movements were deliberate, measured, and dangerous. Every second they delayed could be the difference between life and death. Mark glanced at the victims, their eyes wide with terror, and realized the full scope of the situation. The evil in this barn was organized, intelligent, and unpredictable. It had its rules, its plans, and it had already succeeded once. Evelyn whispered, voice barely audible, I didn't think he'd do this. I tried to stop him." Mark's mind raced. He had to contain this situation before anyone else got hurt. His gun was steady in his hand, but his heart pounded in anticipation of the next move. Rex growled low again, hackles raised, teeth bared, eyes unblinking. The dog had sensed it all, the danger, the malice, the intent. And at that moment, Mark knew one terrifying truth. The nightmare wasn't over, not by a long shot. A sudden, metallic clatter echoed from the back of the barn, followed by a deliberate shuffle. The older man smirked, his eyes gleaming in the dim light, and Mark realized they had company and it was coming closer. Rex snarled, ready to strike. Mark tightened his grip on the gun. And the barn seemed to breathe, shadows moving with life, as if it too were aware of the terror unfolding inside. The barn seemed alive, every shadow stretching and twisting in the dim glow of Mark's flashlight. The older man, crouched low, watched them like a predator sizing up prey. His smirk never left his face, but the tension radiating from him was palpable. Mark tightened his grip on the gun, the cold steel steady in his hand, and glanced at Rex. The dog's instincts had never been wrong. Tonight, Mark knew, they were the difference between life and death. Rex's ears twitched, head low, nose working the air with frantic determination. He sniffed every corner, every beam, every pile of hay. Then he froze, muscles taut, eyes locked on the far side of the barn where a shadow moved barely perceptibly. A slight shuffle, almost drowned by the groan of the barn's timbers. Rex growled low, a warning not just to Mark but to the darkness itself. Mark followed the dog's gaze, shining the flashlight carefully. He spotted the glint of metal beneath the hay near the back wall, chains, ropes, and the unmistakable outline of a trapdoor, partially obscured. The realization hit him in the pit of his stomach. There could be more victims below, hidden from sight. "Rex," Mark whispered, steadying himself, "show me." The dog darted forward, claws scraping the floor, sniffing the edge of the trapdoor. He barked sharply, turning to Mark, then back at the hidden opening as if to say, "It's down there." Now. Mark knelt, flashlight illuminating the trapdoor, and tugged at the rusty latch. The wood groaned, protesting the decades of disuse, but with careful effort he managed to lift it. A foul, metallic smell rushed upward, choking Mark. He gagged, covering his mouth, his eyes watering. The flashlight beam fell on the narrow stairway leading down into the darkness. It smelled of rot, damp earth, and blood long dried. Faint scratching and shuffling noises came from below. Mark swallowed hard. The investigator and young man both tensed beside him, fear evident in every muscle. Evelyn whispered something under her breath, her voice trembling, "Please, please do." Mark took a deep breath. He had no choice. He descended the stairs slowly, gun raised, flashlight sweeping the small, confined space. Rex followed, low growls vibrating in his chest, hackles raised. The dog's instincts guided Mark to the corner where the sound had originated. There, shackled to the floor, huddled two more figures. Their eyes were wide with panic, faces streaked with dirt and blood. Mark moved quickly to free them, cutting the ropes and chains as carefully as possible while keeping his flashlight trained on the rafters above. The victims were exhausted, barely able to stand. One was a woman, no older than 28, her body trembling uncontrollably. The other was a man, his cheek bruised, blood crusted at the corner of his mouth. They buried us," the man whispered hoarsely. "We were left down here for, I don't know, weeks. We thought we were going to die." Rex nudged each victim gently, almost guiding them toward Mark. His gaze never left the shadows above. The dog's instincts told him what Mark could not yet see. The threat wasn't over. Mark glanced at the older man still in the loft, watching from above. "It's over," Mark barked, but his voice barely carried over the hollow space of the barn. The older man laughed, a cruel, hollow sound that made Mark's blood run cold. "Over? You think you can stop it now?" he sneered. "It's already too late." Mark's stomach sank. The private investigator, now leaning heavily against him for support, muttered, He's not alone. He has others. The network, they protect each other. And they know we're here." Rex barked again, urgent and commanding. The dog's instincts flared like a warning flare. He raced to a far corner of the lower chamber, pawing at a loose board. Mark moved to follow, flashlight revealing another hidden compartment. Inside, a small pile of objects, a collection of ID cards, wallets, and photographs of missing people. Each face was familiar to the investigator, victims of disappearances that had gone unsolved for months, some even years. Mark's blood ran cold. This is bigger than we thought," he muttered. Evelyn's face drained of color, her sobs now silent, body trembling. I didn't know how far it went." Rex barked once more, louder this time, spinning toward the stairwell. Mark followed, gun raised. A sound, metallic, deliberate, like boots on wood, echoed from the loft above. The older man had moved. He wasn't alone. Mark's training told him the same truth Rex already knew. The threat was intelligent, patient, and close. Every second they spent rescuing the victims gave the mastermind time to strike. From above, a shadow shifted again. A figure emerged from the loft, tall, masked partially by the dim light. Mark raised his gun. The figure froze, then slowly raised a hand, revealing a set of keys and a small notebook. The investigator gasped. Those keys open every lock he's ever used, and that notebook, it has the locations of other victims. Evelyn sobbed, her body shaking violently. I can show you, I can tell you everything, I'll help." Mark glanced at Rex, who barked and circled the figure, hackles raised. The dog's instincts had never been wrong. Every movement, every sound, every scent screamed danger but also truth. Rex had found what Mark could not, the key to stopping this network. Mark's pulse raced as he realized. The barn had revealed the first layer of horror, but there was more, much more. The mastermind's plans, the network of victims, the scale of evil. Rex had uncovered the tip of a horrifying iceberg. Mark looked at Evelyn, then at the investigator, then back to the dog. "We follow Rex," he said grimly. "He'll lead us where we need to go, and we end this." The dog barked sharply, a single sound full of command and promise. He had sensed the remaining danger, the remaining victims, the people still in peril, and he would not be ignored. Mark drew a deep breath. "Let's move." The barn seemed to tighten around them, the shadows alive, the air heavy. Rex led the way down the narrow corridor, nose to the ground, ears up, muscles coiled. Every step was calculated, deliberate. Every heartbeat echoed the gravity of what lay ahead. Mark whispered under his breath, "Rex, don't let me fail." The dog's gaze met his, unwavering, unflinching, as if answering, "We won't fail. Not tonight." A sudden crash echoed from the loft above. The mastermind, or someone protecting him, was still there, watching, waiting, ready to strike. And Mark realized, with a chill that reached his bones, the barn had revealed only part of the horror. The real nightmare was still ahead. By the time backup arrived, the barn was a scene of controlled chaos. Flashing patrol lights cut through the darkness, illuminating the shattered wood, scattered chains, and terrified victims huddled in corners. Mark stayed low, flashlight in one hand, gun in the other, as officers poured in, securing the perimeter. Yet his eyes never left Rex, who circled the barn with a precision that made even the most experienced deputies pause. The dog's instincts had uncovered lives that would have been lost if not for him. Evelyn sat against the side of the barn, knees drawn to her chest, sobbing silently. Her body shook violently and her eyes were hollow, haunted. Officers handcuffed her, reading her rights, but she barely registered them. All she could do was repeat over and over, "I didn't mean, I didn't mean." The private investigator was led to a stretcher. He was battered, bruised, but alive, whispering thanks to Rex under his breath as the dog sniffed him cautiously, as if confirming he had survived. Mark felt a surge of pride mixed with unease. Rex's instincts had been flawless, but the horrors he'd sensed would linger in both their minds for a long time. Forensics began combing through the barn. Shallow graves behind the structure were discovered, already disturbed, some marked with fresh dirt and splashes of blood. Evidence pointed to a network of perpetrators, not just Evelyn's husband. This was organized, calculated, and terrifying in scope. The local police had cracked a case they hadn't even known existed, all thanks to a German shepherd who had refused to ignore his instincts. Mark helped guide victims away from the barn. Each face carried fear, relief, and shock. He noticed the way Rex stayed close to the survivors, scanning every shadow, as though ensuring no danger remained. The dog had saved not just lives, but the very fragile sense of safety that had been ripped away by years of deception and cruelty. Later in the hospital, the private investigator recovered slowly. He repeatedly asked about Rex, refusing to leave the room without the dog by his side. He saved me," the investigator said hoarsely. "If he hadn't been there, I wouldn't have made it out of that barn alive." Mark watched the scene, chest tight. He knew Rex didn't act out of heroism in the human sense. He acted out of instinct, honed over years of training and fueled by something primal. Yet in that instinct lay salvation. The county quickly realized the scale of the network. Missing person reports, unsolved disappearances, and mysterious deaths over the past years were now being linked to the same group. The investigation exploded across news outlets nationwide, prompting FBI involvement. The barn wasn't an isolated crime scene. It was a hub, a warning to the rest of the perpetrators that someone was watching, someone who wouldn't hesitate. Evelyn's confession revealed chilling details. She had been manipulated into aiding her husband's crimes, believing she was protecting herself and others from harm. But the truth was undeniable. She was complicit, even if reluctantly. She was sentenced to life in prison, her words before sentencing haunting everyone present. "I thought silence would protect me. I didn't know it would destroy so many lives." Mark tried to rest after the ordeal, but sleep was elusive. His dreams were haunted by the barn, by the victim's eyes, and by the calculated malice that had permeated the building. And through it all, Rex remained vigilant, even at home, responding to shadows, listening for noises that Mark couldn't hear. Weeks later, during a routine patrol, Mark and Rex came across an abandoned grain silo on the outskirts of town. Rex froze immediately, muscles taut, nose to the ground, growling low. Mark recognized the behavior instantly. He had seen it before. A flash of dread shot through him. "Not again," Mark muttered, tightening his grip on the leash. The silo stood silent, imposing, but Mark knew better. Rex's instincts had never been wrong. They never were. Mark glanced down at the dog. "All right, boy, let's see what you found." Rex barked sharply, tail stiff, and bolted toward the building, dragging Mark forward. The past horrors of the barn were behind them, but the work was far from over. Somewhere beyond the fields and darkness, more lives were waiting to be discovered. And Rex, unwavering, relentless, was ready to find them. The abandoned grain silo loomed like a silent sentinel on the edge of the county, shadows stretching into the cold night. Mark's breath misted in the crisp air as he followed Rex's lead, flashlight in one hand, gun in the other. The dog's nose was pressed low, ears forward, hackles raised, a signal Mark knew well. Something was inside, something alive, something that couldn't stay hidden any longer. Backup had been called again, but Mark moved first. Years of experience told him one truth: Rex's instincts didn't lie. Tonight, they were chasing more than shadows, they were chasing lives. The ground around the silo was littered with debris, rusted barrels, broken boards, and tracks that led toward a side entrance partially hidden by overgrown weeds. Rex froze, pawing at the metal door, growling low. Mark knelt beside him, shining the flashlight. The smell hit first, sharp, metallic, familiar. Blood, not fresh but lingering, thick enough to curl the stomach. He pulled at the door. It groaned but gave way just enough to slip inside. The interior was oppressive, dark, and filled with the same air of malice that had haunted the barn. Shadows pooled against the walls, and the faintest scratching echoed from the upper platforms. Rex's growl deepened, a warning, a guide, a pulse of pure instinct. Mark moved carefully, flashlight cutting slices through the darkness. Ahead, a figure stirred, weak, trapped, trembling. A young woman, wrists bound, hair matted with sweat and dirt. Her wide eyes reflected terror and disbelief as Mark approached. "It's okay, you're safe now," he whispered. His words were half reassurance, half command. Rex barked sharply, spinning to the shadows above. Mark froze. From the loft, a shadow moved, a tall, broad figure with cruel eyes, watching, calculating. His movements were slow, deliberate, but menacing. This wasn't just a caretaker of this silo. This was someone with intent, someone dangerous. Mark raised his gun, signaling to the woman, "Stay down, don't move." The figure on the loft smirked, a flash of recognition crossing his face. "You again," he sneered. "You didn't finish the job last time." Mark's pulse hammered. "This ends tonight," he said firmly. Rex growled, teeth bared, low and warning, his body coiled like a spring. Then, in a sudden, fluid motion, the dog leapt toward the figure, claws scraping the metal floor. The man reacted too slowly. Rex's body collided with him, knocking him off balance, sending him sprawling onto the lower platform. Mark sprinted forward, flashlight and gun trained, and restrained the man as Rex held firm, growling, refusing to release his grip until backup officers arrived moments later. The young woman was freed quickly, her sobs choking in the cold air. She clung to Mark, trembling violently, but relief was etched across her face. Mark glanced at Rex, whose tail wagged briefly, a small, proud acknowledgement, but his eyes never left the subdued figure. Instinct had prevailed once again. Over the next weeks, the investigation expanded exponentially. The barn and silo cases were linked through Evelyn's testimony, the private investigator's records, and the recovered notebook full of locations, victims, and methods. What had begun as a simple noise complaint turned into a national scandal, exposing a network of abductions, intimidation, and ritualized cruelty that stretched across multiple counties. Rex became a legend within the department. News outlets highlighted the dog's instinct and bravery, calling him the guardian of Cedar Hollow. Awards and commendations followed, but Mark noticed something deeper. The respect Rex commanded wasn't just for heroics, it was for a kind of understanding no human could replicate. In the quiet moments after the investigation, Mark would sit with Rex, sometimes in silence, sometimes recounting the horrors they'd seen. The barn, the silo, the chains, the terrified eyes, they were all etched into his memory. But Rex never faltered, never doubted, always vigilant. One evening, Mark walked through the fields near the barn one last time. The sun was setting, painting the sky in deep reds and purples. He glanced at the ruined barn and the surrounding land, now quiet, now safe. Rex trotted beside him, ears up, tail relaxed but alert. Mark crouched, scratching the dog behind the ears. "We saved them, boy," he murmured. "We did everything we could." Rex leaned into his touch, a simple acknowledgement that words could never capture. Together they had faced darkness, human darkness, organized and deliberate, and emerged with lives intact, truths revealed, and justice set in motion. But Mark knew, as he watched the horizon, that evil could hide anywhere. It could wait for the unprepared, slip into shadows, and strike again. And if it did, he knew one thing with absolute certainty: Rex would be ready. The dog's instincts, unerring and relentless, had changed the course of countless lives. That night and all the nights to come, he would remain the silent guardian, the unseen hero. Mark stood looking at the fields, the barn, the sky. The horrors they had faced would haunt him forever, but so would the courage, loyalty, and pure instinct of a dog who refused to ignore what no human could sense. Rex nudged his hand, impatient for the next adventure, the next call to action. And for Mark, that was enough. The sun dipped below the horizon, shadows retreating, but one truth remained. In a world full of darkness, sometimes salvation comes on four legs, with teeth, fur, and a heart bigger than any human fear. And sometimes heroes don't speak, they act.